Okay, welcome to the question and answer on renting and landlording. I put these two together because the more you know about renting a place, the more you also know about landlording. And the more you know about landlording, the more you know about renting. So before we begin, I want to give a recommendation. I very rarely do these for specific products, specific books, specific services. I very rarely give a recommendation. But in the course of my career, I have found no other book, no other series of books more useful for renting or landlording. It is literally the series that got me my basic, and actually more than basic, very good knowledge about how to rent out houses. And upon reading the whole series, I realized that it would have been a lot better when I rented a place, when I was a renter, if I had read the book and I knew how to do things. I think it is a must to read a book about renting and your rights and your responsibilities as a renter before you do. If I'm talking to early 20s, late teens people, there is a huge chance you will be renting at some point in your life. You must, according to me, learn how to do it correctly. Now, that being said, I suggest this book to learn how to do it correctly. You don't have to do the book. My only 100% suggestion is you do learn how to rent correctly. However, if you want the shortcut to the best book I have ever found on renting, and it will also, by reading the book on Every Tenant's Legal Guide, you will also learn a lot about landlording. So many of you are thinking about at some point being a small-time landlord. But almost all of you will be renting. So that's why we start with Every Tenant's Legal Guide, because everyone's going to rent basically. And then some of you will learn a lot about landlording by just reading this book. The company is called Nolo. They sell a lot of stuff. Nolo.com. The name of the book is Every Tenant's Legal Guide. I am not affiliated with them, but it is the reason I say it. It is the book that taught me the most about renting, and I read a lot of books. And it was an introduction to landlording. And then their landlording book, they have books for many, many different subjects. I have read all their tenant and landlord books. Don't go into a renting situation blind. It is legally regulated. And you want to know the rules of the game before you put down thousands of dollars. And it deals with how you're living and where you live. There's literally nothing more important than that except for food. Every Tenant's Legal Guide. Highly, highly recommended. Okay, let's do leases and money, a series of leasing and money questions. Now, first off, the term lease is what you use. You could use a rental agreement, but almost everyone says lease. It is a contract, but you call it a lease. So I will use the term lease from here on out. It is a legally binding contract that spells out the rights and responsibilities of the tenant and the landlord. Now, certain rights and responsibilities are regulated by state and federal law, but there's a lot of things about renting where you negotiate it with the landlord, such as who does yard upkeep, who pays for electricity. There are many questions that are in the lease. What happens if this occurs? What happens if that occurs? A lease cannot break federal law, and it cannot remove your state and legal federal rights. But if it's not covered by the government, the lease is the legal contract. Okay, so easy question. Can the landlord change the rent before the lease expires? The answer is no, because the lease is a legal contract. So unless a rent changes in the lease agreed, no. Leases generally go from, sometimes they're month-to-month agreements. Sometimes they're half-year agreements. Most of the time, we run a cycle of renting and landlording in 1 year. Sometimes there's 2 years, but that gets a little longer. You typically want a 1-year lease, typically, to provide the best balance of stability, because you know everything will be same for that 1 year, and the landlord knows everything's going to be same for that 1 year, and flexibility. So then, because you're renting for 1 year, you can get out 1 year and move. You can move out of the city. You won't have to break your lease. The landlord can also, if things change a lot, raise the rent, or if they don't like how you're renting, they can ask you to leave after the 1 year. 2 years is a long time. 6 months is sometimes done. Month to month is very, very unstable. And a year is what people usually contract for. And they cannot change the rent during that year. It is spelled out how much you owe. Okay, well, what if you break your lease and leave? Life happens. When that happens, you are legally responsible for what you promised to pay. So if you leave a 1-year lease after 2 months, you are responsible for those next 10 months. Now, in many, many locations, I can only speak for my location because rules on renting and landlording are different via state and areas. In my location, if you break your lease, the landlord has to, in good faith, try to rent out the place. And they have to do a normal renting out. They can't go slow. And you are responsible until they find another equivalent candidate. And that person comes in and starts renting. Now, this happened to me once. I had someone leave after a month. They paid for the next 2 months because it took me 2 months to find the next person. And then they were gone. Now, if you leave and you don't pay, the landlord could take you to court. And you could get a court judgment. And you will probably not win that court case if you are just breaking your lease for no reason. A lease is a contract. And then you will have a judgment against you. And then, if they wanted to, they could enforce that judgment through the government. And if you don't pay, it will ruin your credit score. You'll have a legal judgment against you on your credit report. It's not a good thing. So if you have to break your lease, work with your landlord and expect to pay until they get it rented. Now, if your landlord leaves it empty and doesn't try to rent it at all, you have a case there. But once again, it's going to be in the courts. All right. When the lease expires, can the landlord increase the rent? In general, yes. And most likely, many leases go up by a cost of living factor every single year. So expect that. Now, there are certain places that are under laws of what's called rent control, and they just can't raise it a lot. Because this happens. Sometimes you're in for a year, the location becomes really hot, and the landlord could go up by 50% if the place gets really, really hot from a market standpoint. Okay, but certain places, usually in cities, where the fluctuations, where the rent and housing fluctuates a lot in cities, there's things called rent control where they are limited by the amount that they can go up or down. But in a non-rent control place, the answer is when your lease is up, whatever the landlord wants to charge, they can do that. And if it's too much for you, you will have to find another place. But usually it's pretty stable. Now, let me talk a little on this. If the market is stable, okay? If the market is stable and the market's not hot and there's not a lot of people wanting to rent, everything's the same as your 1-year lease. And your lease comes up and you want to live again for a year, sign again. Your landlord is probably going to want to raise your rent a little bit. But if you get to that landlord and you negotiate a little, and if you are a perfect tenant, the one thing in that landlord's mind, usually with small landlords or family landlords, is no problems. They don't want problems. They want someone who takes care of things. They want someone that pays every month. They just don't want to get calls that there's troubles. So if you were a perfect tenant for 1 year and you want to stay another year, go to your landlord and say, hey, I was a perfect tenant. Can I just extend the lease? Same thing, same rent. And oftentimes it is worth the little less money not raising the rent just to have a great tenant, okay? So you have to advocate for yourself as a perfect tenant. Invite them in. Well, obviously there's rules about them coming in and not coming in. Obviously with notice they can come in, but show them how great you kept the place. Show them how amazing it is, because you're a perfect tenant. Now, if you're not a perfect tenant, you've got no bargaining power, but that was your choice. That was your choice. And the worse of a tenant you are, the less bargaining power you have. Oh yeah, if there's a bad tenant, if you're a bad tenant, they might just say, I'm going to get a new one, and after your lease, you're gone. Or if you're just like kind of not a good tenant, things aren't spotless, you don't take care of the property as if it's your own home, then they're like, okay, maybe you can stay, but we're going to increase your rent by 5% or 7%. You've got no bargaining power unless you're the perfect tenant. If you're the perfect tenant, you have amazing bargaining power because you're giving the landlord exactly what they want. Taking care of the property better than people take care of their own properties, and no headaches, and on-time rent payment all the time. You could stay at a place, theoretically, for a few years with hardly any increase of the rent, as long as you're that perfect tenant. And I'll tell you what, sometimes what landlords do is they charge an extra $100, $500 a year. Like they price, the first time someone comes in, they price it a little bit higher. And then they don't even mind, because they don't know if you're a good tenant. They don't know if you're going to stay for 2 or 3 years, which is what they want, obviously. So they've already got a little extra money that first year as they're seeing who you are. And then as you're perfect, they don't mind raising the rent because they've already factored that in. But that's a little landlord thing. Not all landlords do it, but it's just there giving you a little idea of what some do. So you have a lot of bargaining power the better you are as a tenant. Okay, so question. As a renter, what are you allowed to do to the house and the property? ? Here's your simple answer. Nothing. It's not yours unless it's agreed upon. So keep it in your head that you will always be safe if you do nothing. And then you could do things if it's agreed upon. So if you want to go into a property and paint the walls, you're going to have to talk to the landlord. And you are required, unless agreed otherwise, to return the property to its original condition minus normal wear and tear. Okay, so a little bit of handprints on the wall is normal wear and tear for a year, like around the stairs, but it wouldn't be like in the living room. Scratches are not normal wear and tear, like big scratches on the wall are not normal wear and tear, okay? There's some disagreement of whether like dirty windows are normal wear and tear, okay? But painting of a wall, you can't leave with a wall of a different color that you did. That's not original condition, and you will be charged for it. So in the end, to sum it up, if you want to do something to the house, the property, the apartment, chances are you should talk to your landlord about it. They might or might not let you, and they're definitely going to request that you return it to its original state, or they're going to charge you for it. So it's not out of the ordinary, but in general, you don't do things that change the property very much at all. It opens a can of worms. All right. Would it be normal for a decent-sized family to be renting a house for all their lives instead of just purchasing one? That's location specific and income specific. It happens. Okay. But think about it. It's not really all of their lives, right? It's really only 25 years, and then the family is smaller. For decent-sized family, well, that's the kids living in the house, okay, and needing bedrooms, right, and not really even babies. So, it's when kids start being 5 or so, and then it's all the years until they're out of the house at like 18 or so. Just massage the numbers a little, and you get this. So, really that space is only needed, the bigness of it, for 25 years. And you see a lot of this happen. You see a lot of families that are going to have, let's say, 3 or 4 kids. I don't know what you mean by decent-sized family, but let's say 3 or 4 kids. And they do purchase a bigger house for those 25 years. And then as soon as the majority of those kids are out, or the last kid is out, they downsize their house, sell the bigger one, and move into a smaller one. That, I don't want to say that's normal, but many people do it. Now, it depends on the size of the family. It depends on your finances. You could rent for those same years. I don't know if it has to be individual, whether it would save you money or not. But it's possible. So I know of areas where people do rents. They rent a floor, and you can rent a large place. You can rent a 1,500 square foot. I don't know if those numbers mean anything. 2,000 square foot floor or a house for acceptable price. Now it's costs and benefits. Typically, I think if you're going to have around 4 kids or so, you probably want the space. That's probably valuable. You can probably find a cheap enough house to make it more financially beneficial than renting, but do the numbers. Do the numbers on what you want, where you want to be, what's gonna make you more money. And don't forget, if you're saving money by renting, you have to invest that money. Otherwise, it's not really saving money. And finally, there is something to be said. If you're going to rent with a family, you want stability. So you got to make sure that the place you're in is for you could still be out after the lease a year. You could probably, if you're long-term, get 2-year leases, but you're still has that instability. So that's one of the biggest negatives. But it's definitely, let's stay away from normal. Let's just say there are all options and people do all the options. And I can show you different areas and different families that do all the options. Okay, so I'm going to stay away from normal and just say all those options are out there with pros and cons. Okay, does the landlord cover all upkeep of the property? And what about places where the tenant does it? Is it still worth it to rent? Renting really comes down to your time and the money that it costs to rent and the space you need. You can figure this out financially with the numbers, okay? Typically, from what I've seen, places where many people live together, like apartments or 6-unit places where you've got 6 different units, typically come with more landlord-covered upkeep, okay? So if you've got 6 apartments, how are you going to organize who shovels the snow? How are you going to organize who does the lawn? Okay, it just becomes really difficult. And living in apartments or multi-unit places, one of the negatives is you're around a lot of people, and one of the benefits is you have less to do. It becomes more of just a living place and not where you have to upkeep it. Now, if someone's renting a house or half a house or a floor in a house, typically the tenants take on a little more of the upkeep, to the extent that if you're renting a full house, you are getting the benefits of a full house, and it's treated, the reasons you're renting a full house is for it to feel like it's your house. And typically, the tenants, depends in the area, but sometimes they even want to do the lawn, shovel the snow, and sometimes not. It's all what's agreed to in the lease. And remember, you look at what the going rates are. If you have 2 places that are the same cost, how is that landlord going to get you into that place? Because you have a choice. It's called competition. If there's competition for places where there's a lot of apartments or a lot of homes ready to go into, maybe the landlord will take care of more of the stuff. And maybe if there's a place that comes with, if you're the only person in there that comes with snow removal or that, maybe you can get a little less of the rent if you take care of it, okay? It's all open to negotiation. But remember, it all comes down to, the power of your negotiation comes down to how attractive are you as a tenant from a financial standpoint, a credit score standpoint, a responsibility standpoint. If you are an attractive candidate that has a lot of good qualities, high credit score, a lot of references, a lot of history of being an awesome tenant, and there's a lot of choice you have because there's a lot of other places you could go, that's a lot of supply, then you have a lot of negotiating power. You can really work a very good relationship. If there's not a lot of places open to rent, and you don't have a good credit score, and then you have a little less room to negotiate. Always think, though, things you can do to save your landlord time and money is kind of worth it if it works on your end. Landlords are looking to save time and money and to have less headaches with the property. They want good tenants that treat the place better than regular people treat their own house better. And they don't want headaches, and they want the rent on time. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.